Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Horror Room. I'm Travis Bruce, and today we're doing another Women of Horror Spotlight. Today I have with us, she's an author, and she has a book out right now that's called My Dreadful Dreams, 13 Tales of Terror. I have with us Hokonani Sorchi. Hokonani, welcome to the Horror Room.
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
It's always a pleasure of having women of horror on my show.
It's so weird. I never thought I would be a woman of horror.
I'm gonna jump into that, but first, Hoki, tell us a little bit about My Dreadful Dreams.
So this collection is 13 Tales, and it originally started back in March of 2022 is when I started writing them. And I just, I wrote one story, which in the collection is called Feed Tibinuk. That was my first, and I sent it out to some friends, and they were like, "Oh, this is actually pretty good. You should write some more." And I was like, "Oh man, I got hundreds of ideas. I'll try." So I wrote a bunch more. I ended up with 15 stories. Um, when I tried to traditionally put it out there, I tried querying and everything, rejected, completely rejected. Nobody wants horror collections, apparently, from an unknown. So after that, I decided to publish it myself. My editor actually suggested I whittle it down a little bit. She suggested that I build up some of the other stories and take two of them out to be like reworked into like longer stories. She thought there was so much more there, like lore wise, that I could make them longer. So I took two out, ended up with 13, and yeah, there it is. Oh wait. Here it is.
There it is. Bam! Right there. Love that cover. Love that cover.
Thank you. Me too. It's probably one of my favorite covers I've ever seen.
So how did you get into horror writing?
Oh man. I was not a horror fan growing up, like at all. I was terrified of anything scary. I was super into fantasy. Like fantasy was my jam. Dragons and mermaids and fairies and all that fun, sparkly stuff was everything I loved. I used to get like super crazy nightmares of anything scary. So I avoided horror like for most of my child, teen, and adult life. And it wasn't until I was in my 20s that my husband was like, "Hey, let me show you a movie I think you might be okay with handling." And it was Shaun of the Dead.
Love it. Yeah.
Horror comedy, and I also loved, British comedy too. So he showed me that, and the whole time I was like, okay, this is scary, but it's also funny. So that was sort of my gateway drug to horror. After that, I was like, hey, what else can I handle? And now, I watch everything, I read everything, just obsessed with horror now, like even more than him. Like he totally just let me into the realm, and then I just went crazy.
Love it. Now, okay, so like a lot of people, right? A lot of people they want to jump into the horror realm or become a horror creator, whether it be a YouTube author, filmmaker, whatever. But like it took me for years. I was thinking about doing a YouTube channel, and I was like, "Fuck it!" I just did it one day. How did you get to the point where you were like, you know what? I'm going to do this. I'm going to go ahead and write this. I'm going to get an editor. And even though no one wants to publish it, you know what? I'm going to do self-publishing.
Well, it started out with just sort of wanting to write a story and see if I could write something horrific. I'm going to be turning 40 this year. So my entire life I've wanted to be a writer, a published author. Back then I thought I would be writing, epic fantasy, but things change over time. So when I got really into horror, really loving horror movies, reading horror books, I eventually thought, what if I try to write something scary? So like with that first story, I wrote it, and my friends seemed to be like, "Oh, that's really cool," and part of you is like, do they really like it, or are they just my friends saying this is cool? So, I just went with, they probably actually think it's good. I wrote some more stories, and each one, especially with some of my early critique partners, they were like, this is good, but can you give us more? Can you up the horror a little bit more? I'm like, yeah, okay, I've seen some stuff. I could probably write some pretty scary, gnarly things. After that, it was all coming together, and I was just so happy with what I'd done. I was like, I want to put this in the world. I want people to read this and and have dreadful dreams. I want to be the, person who creates a character as epic as, Freddy or Jason or something. I want you to see my characters like living in your brain,
Yeah.
like just living there. And so even if I wasn't going to make any money off this, if I could put my book out there somehow and have people read these characters and be like, wow, that is something I have never read before. That is what like pushed me to go this route. Even when traditional publishing didn't pan out, I was like, I need to get my story out there. So I could have done it for free because people can self-publish for free. Like, it's out there and it's possible. But I wanted the best version of my stories out there. So yeah, I got an editor, I got a cover artist, I got an interior designer. I went through so many rounds of edits and critiques with friends and anyone. When I put my arcs out there, I was like, tell me what's missing, tell me where the holes are, because I want these stories to be as good as possible. And I think the end result speaks for itself. I think this is a pretty darn good collection.
Now, when it comes to self-publishing, there's a lot of new authors who watch your show, or they want to be an author, they want to self-publish. What are some challenges that you ran into when it came to self-publishing?
What I didn't know is like a huge challenge when I had never thought about self-publishing. I was like, traditional is the only way you can do. And then finding out that there's so much information out there, there's so many possibilities out there. It's overwhelming. It really is, because you don't know where to start. So I would say the best place to start is with groups in Facebook. I joined a lot of writers groups. I joined some self-publishing groups, some critique groups that are people who pose those questions, who are like, how do I do this? Like, where do I start? What kind of information can you give me about things? That's a good place to start, because then you have people who are in all seasons of life. They are where you are, just starting out. You have people who are veterans who can give you really good advice. Obviously, you take everything with a grain of salt, because you don't know what's real and what's not. So gather as much information as you can. Google's your best friend. Search, where do I start for self-publishing? Search, what is an arc? What sort of cover art do I need? And then through all those things, once you start finding the people who you are interested in, especially if they're in your genre, because I swear the hardest thing to find is like people who will focus on horror specifically, like finding a cover artist who is horror. When someone's like, oh yeah, I make covers all the time. I do fantasy, I do sci-fi, I do romance, I do, any genre except horror. Like, that's the hardest place to be, I think, is that specifically. So I found an editor who did horror. I found a cover artist who did horror, an interior designer who also didn't mind doing horror, because you don't want to like ask someone to do your book and then they focus on like Christian literature. It's probably not the best connection to make. I had some recommendations. Oh, this editor is great. And then I look at their list and it's like, I do a lot of, self-help books. And I'm like, you might be a great editor or, a great artist, but you're not my genre. So I would recommend looking for people in your genre. Don't accept someone who's like, I can do anything, because they might be able to do like really good things in a few categories, but they won't specifically do yours if you don't see it listed. And then also vet anyone that you're interested in. So look them up on different social media platforms, see if they have a website. If they've done other projects, maybe reach out to those people and ask how their partnerships work. Like, because sometimes they'll say, oh yeah, I did this book, and then you find out they never even touched it. Like they'll name some big name writer or something, and you'll be like, how did they get that book? They probably didn't. So gather as much information as you can before you like put any money down. And then from there, it's really, you're putting your trust in someone. And I'm just really grateful that the people I found were real people who did amazing jobs and everything turned out like way better than I ever thought it could be.
And that's so important. Even when it comes to my YouTube channel, networking is the biggest thing, and finding like-minded individuals to build with. But the key is you got to stick with the people, even down the road. That's what you do, and like don't keep switching out. But so like we met through the Ladies of Horror. What was it? It's called the Ladies Horror Authors Facebook group.
Yes, yeah, Ladies of Horror authors. I forget the long name, but
Or
yes.
it's something. I mean, that's a great group, and they allowed me as a male to be a part of that group. But like, it's a great group. I've gotten so many interviews from women horror authors, and I just feel like, especially when it comes to the indie scene, women horror authors don't get that spotlight and that glitter and sparks that a lot of male horror authors get.
It's been difficult because I think it'd be like a guy trying to break into like the romance genre. It's been
Yeah.
so much a part of like one gender that any newcomers, it takes some time. It takes some trust of figuring out, can a woman write horror? Like, what do they bring to the table? And a lot of the horror that I've read from women, I think, is horrific. I mean, I relate to it, especially if it's like women revenge horror, things like that. But also, there have been some really great stories that have just been terrifying. I mean, Darcy Coates, who is like extremely prolific, and she writes everything from like cute, cuddly ghost stories to like absolutely terrifying stories. She can write, a whole range of stuff, which if you didn't know like who she was, you would just assume she was a male writer with how prolific she is and how good she is. So, yeah, I think women horror writers are bringing a lot to the table that we weren't expecting.
I 100% agree. I 100% agree. And I mean, because I mean, there was a time when you heard of a woman horror author, their books and stories usually related or relatable to women. But now, like you said, you can, when it comes to Darcy, you can pick up a book and you don't know it's written by a woman. It's relatable to everyone.
Yeah, I think that's great. And, it's also funny too, because there was also this stigma about male writers writing female characters who are all the same, bodaciously like hot, ditzy, like running and tripping all the time, kind of like in movies.
Yeah, one.
So I think a lot of the times, like women were like, I could write a better character than this, and so then they jumped in and were like, you know what, we're going to write strong female characters. We're going to write what's really hot right now. Feminine rage stories are like all the rage right now.
Hmm.
The uh, just like years and decades of anger coming out in the horror realm, and it's been really amazing to watch.
So I'm gonna something you just said. I'm gonna ask you the opposite of that. As a woman horror author, is it hard for you to write a male character and not have him? Because I've seen women horror writers, sometimes they do a male character, and every male character sounds like the biggest pig ever. And like, and I'm reading, I'm like, no man talks or acts like that. I'm not saying there are some, but majority of men don't act or talk like that.
No, I totally agree. It's kind of like when sometimes, like, okay, because I also read romance, but you'll have guys talk and it does not sound like how a guy talk.
Yeah.
Like one I read recently where it was like, oh, bro, I got your back, bro. Like, we're best buds. And I'm like, none of my guy friends talk like that. Like, that's just hilarious. And yeah, the same thing kind of happens, I think, in horror as well, where you have guys that are either just absolute monsters that are completely irredeemable, which is fun sometimes, because you
Hmm.
want a villain who you could just be like, yeah, get him. But other times you're like, I kind of wish there was some subtleties to it. I actually write quite a few of my stories from a male perspective. I don't know why, it
Hmm.
clicks sometimes. And also, I also read a lot of stories. Well, at least in the collection, I have a couple stories that have no defined gender. So the character themselves is whoever you want them to be. And I found it funny, especially in the very last story that's at the end of my collection, which is called Drifters. It's an existential ghost story. This person has no defined gender, so to hear people talk about it after the fact, and they're like, "Wow, when he was going through this, like, that was amazing," and then someone else would be like, "Oh man, when this was happening to her, I couldn't believe it." So I love seeing how sometimes it's based on like maybe a woman reader will read a female character,
Hmm.
a male reader will read a male character, or in some cases, because people know who I am, that I'm a woman, they'll read it automatically as a female, even if in my head I kind of wrote it with more sort of like a male leaning feeling to it. Um, but yeah, I find it like fascinating that if given the choice, people will sort of fill that hole with whoever they see the character as.
I love books like that. I love books like that. When it comes to your writing, when you are writing these 15 that narrow down to 13 stories, do you use personal? Well, what percent of the stories are come from your personal life experiences?
I think every single one of my stories has something that from my life. A lot of it is like there's one story in particular called Her Muse, which is about a writer who is self-published, obviously wants to
Oh,
become a traditionally published writer, and she meets her muse essentially, and after this moment, she blows up, like becomes super famous, and then things progress from there. It's not it's one of my least horrific stories in the collection. It's more of like a psychological drama, but it's like she is also kind of a horrible person. So she's like the worst parts of me I put into
mhm,
her. And a lot of other characters are like bits and pieces from like people I've known or bits of myself. I especially like to put in my villains all the worst parts of what I see in myself, you know? Like the things would be like, oh, in this situation, what would I do that would be like the worst thing that I would think of? So, you know, things like that, or a lot of situations like a funny one is the shortest story is The Speck, and it's about a person who has something in their eye and they can't find it, but it's just there. And the story goes of like, what would you do if you just could not get this tiny thing, this speck out of your eye? And the whole story is actually told in second person, so it's you specifically. It's like there's something in your eye, and the story goes like that. And that came from a day when I had this tiny something in my
mhm.
eye and I could not get it out, and I was like kind of going a little mad. Even after just a couple minutes, I was like, where is this thing? I need to get it out. And then eventually it did go away, but I was like, what would happen if it didn't? How far would I go? What would I do to get rid of it? But yeah, a lot of the stories in this collection, because it's called My Dreadful Dreams, was based off of either nightmares that I've had or just scenarios, horrible scenarios that would pop in my head randomly throughout the day. There's another one that is based off the idea of like, what if you're kind to someone and it completely backfires, you know? Because as much
Happens
as I
all the time.
have yeah, as much as I have like, you know, scenarios of like what would I do, like what is the worst thing I could do in a situation, I do try to be also like kind to people, just in general, you know. It's nice to
Mhm,
just be kind to other people, but what if that kindness, that desire to help someone, completely backfires? That was terrifying to me, so I was like,
mhm.
okay, what's a scenario where that is like the most horrific thing that could possibly happen?
Now, have you ever killed off an ex or someone you don't like necessarily in any of your stories?
um, Uh, not personally, but there have been traits from people that I've met, you know, over time that I've put into characters that maybe didn't make it. So no one personally that I would say like, oh yeah, this person is the one that dies in this story. It would more be like this person's loosely based off of someone I knew at some point in time.
So I just to see myself on it. By the way, I agree with you when it comes to nightmares. Like I had this whole list. Maybe one day I'll make a horror film, but I have this whole list from nightmares. Like I have like I don't know what it is about nightmares, but nightmares the stories are so vivid and
Yes,
like
yes.
and in some of them and my nightmares when I have them I don't have them often but
Mm.
they're so fucked up they're so fucked up and they make some of the best horror stories.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think some of mine, especially, have sort of stemmed from those feelings. And bravo, by the way, for not having nightmares all the time. I have them all the time, and
Really.
maybe it's from absolute saturation of horror that you know I surround myself with. But also, I think it's just general anxieties about things. My dreams are especially vivid, like anxious dreams. Even if it's not a nightmare scenario, it's I'm trying to find something and I can't find it, like almost video game esque, you know, where you're
Mm-hmm.
searching through catacombs or tunnels or just running zombies. Being chased by zombies was a big thing when I was like really watching The Walking Dead zombie nightmares like every night. Um, There was actually one I had when we first talked. It was about actually this interview. Like after we had talked about me coming on the show, and I was like, "Oh, that's going to be amazing." And then a couple days later, I had a nightmare where we were having this chat, and I was in a different place from my office, but there were just people everywhere talking, and I couldn't hear you. Like, and I had these gigantic headphones on that kept like moving, so I couldn't like even listen. And then you brought in like some other people to the interview to ask me more questions, and I'm just trying to struggle, like answer your questions, answer their questions, like what's going on, like I can't hear anybody. And all the questions were around because I'm originally from Hawaii, and they're all about Hawaii. They're like, oh, what's it like there, like, you know, what's the weather like? And I'm like, great, but can we talk about my book a little, please? And then at the end of the interview, you're like, thanks so much for coming on, and then it ended. And then I immediately get a text on my phone where you said, oh, so I've already put the interview up. It was great. Like, you know, I can't wait to have you back again. And I'm like, oh, thanks so much, Travis. But I didn't really get to talk about my book that much. Like, maybe next time, you know, we could get into that and horror and stuff instead of just focusing on Hawaii. And then somebody else in the text group, not you, but apparently it was group text, somebody else like texted, and the last three words that I got before I woke up were, be grateful, bitch.
Oh, by the way, anybody who ever comes on my show for an interview, right? In the past, when I first started, right, I would put a bad interview up. Like if the interview, your connection could have been bad, an echo or something, I would put a bad interview because I just wanted fucking content. But I realized that was not only bad for my channel because no one watched it or no one stayed watching it. It was bad for my channel, but it was also bad for the guests. So I mean, I literally had this done recently where the guest connection was awful. And it's just, it wasn't a good interview. And I told him, I said, hey, listen, would you like to come back on sometime? I don't think I would be doing my job, which is promoting your work, by putting this interview up.
Totally understandable.
And I never heard back from them, and I think they unsubscribed to my channel. But I mean, it is but it is what it is, because I'm not just going to put. My job is to promote indie horror creators, and I want to every single indie horror creator to be at their best and have a best representation. So I'm not going to, if you're nervous or something, I'm not going to post a bad interview. I'll do a take two with you.
Yes, in that version, I think a take two would have been nice.
Yes, 100%. I would never post that.
But yeah, so things like that, yeah. It like the anxiety that I just have day to day, even if I'm doing absolutely nothing all day, my brain will find things for me to be anxious about while I'm sleeping. So yeah, my dreams for most of my life have just been exhausting because I'm either like just doing something insane or just having stresses about things that haven't even happened yet. Like in this case.
because my like biggest thing when it comes to my nightmares, like you were talking about the puzzles or the game part, it's always it's a scenario, right? But in order for me to get into a scenario, I have to read this important thing. It could be something on my phone or something, and I cannot fucking read it. It's just blurry.
Yes, or like the letters aren't like in order, or they're just jumbled or something.
And that is the last piece of the puzzle for me to get out of this bad situation. But I cannot fucking read it.
Yeah, no, I totally get that. Like frustration. I don't know why, but for some reason, like I think even more than horror, the frustration of a nightmare can be like the worst thing of trying to get to a goal of some kind and just not reaching it. And then throw in the added like horror of a monster chasing you too. Yeah. It's just full on insanity. And I'll wake up and be like to my husband, oh, he will not believe the dream I just had. He's like, was it another bad one? I'm like, yeah, you want to hear? He's like, no, not really. He has fine dreams.
And maybe this is karma, or maybe this is me becoming, self-aware person. So a lot of my nightmares have to do with women I fucked over in the past, like past relationships, and they're definitely getting like revenge on me. So like I'm like, oh shit. So I don't do that anymore. But I'm just saying, I'm like looking back, I'm like, oh damn, like
past failures, past mistakes. Oh my goodness, so many. I get yelled at a lot in my dreams.
Me too.
From people that I've just not been the nicest to, or just, I made a mistake once and I was unkind. And so they get their revenge in my nightmares of just yelling at me.
Yeah.
Sometimes I get the ability to yell back and be like, I'm sorry. I didn't mean it at the time. I was a horrible person back then. I didn't understand, you know, that being kind is like actually a virtue. And, they'll just come right back at me. So sometimes my dreams are just yelling matches. Just.
By the way, I also feel like my dreams are a walking stereotype too, because every one of my dreams, I know how to hotwire a car. I don't know how to hotwire
No
a car.
way!
I always know how to break into a car. Like something is coming after me, and I just magically,
Oh, that's amazing.
as a black man, know how to break into a car and hotwire a car. And I'm like, I don't know how to hotwire a car, but thank God in these dreams I know how to hotwire a car. I can kind of escape for a short period of time.
Man, I wish I had that skill. The best I can do is that when I have dreams, especially of like tsunamis coming, I have a ton of
Mhm.
those. I guess I miss Hawaii, but sometimes I don't. And so I get the dream of the tsunami just coming and I'm on the beach. I have the ability to swim through the wave. So, like, it's
Oh,
coming and
cool.
it just, barrels over, possibly killing everyone else around me. But I dive in and I swim and I swim and then I pop up and I'm okay. So terrifying,
Hmm.
absolutely terrifying. I still have to write a story about like deep ocean because that is one of my fears is deep ocean, the claustrophobia of that.
Yeah.
Um, uh, but I have yet to actually find what I want to tell about that, that sort of terror.
See, but I don't know which skill what I rather have: hotwire a car or be able to swim through deep water. I
Or,
think
or
the deep
actually being able to
water.
breathe underwater.
Yeah, to breathe
I've
on
had
water.
those too. Yeah.
I think I'd rather have that skill than hotwire a car.
Well, it depends where, like, 'cause if you're
It
on
depends where I'm
land,
at.
not as useful. At the
True,
beach,
true, true.
that'd be great.
Because as Michael Myers is chasing me right now, I don't have my keys to my car.
Yeah. Being able to breathe underwater probably would be to help there.
Yeah,
So yeah, I would
exactly.
also take the hot wire car. That would be awesome. You see it happen
I don't,
so much in movies. It looks so easy,
yeah.
and I'm sure it's not.
I feel like I would fucking electrocute myself or there's something
Yeah,
going.
I know, right? That'd be the first thing that I would probably do. I'd be like, oh, what does this wire do?
And the killer just be standing there like this motherfucker just killed
Yeah.
himself. Like, okay.
I didn't have to do anything. I'll just stand there waiting.
So, so,
Oh.
so you originally had 15 stories and you narrowed it down to
Mhm.
13. Why did you
Yes.
choose the other two?
So when I asked my editor about it, she suggested that, one story in particular, she was like, there's a lot here. Like, you could expand this story, but it probably wouldn't fit in your collection anymore. It'd be enormous. So she's like, if you take it out and like work with it and mold it and like expand the lore, like get more about the characters and the situation, it could probably end up being its own story. So after I took that one out, I realized another story in the collection as well had that same sort of feel, like it was bigger than it was in that short story collection. So both of those went out. Of course, every you worry like, oh, I've taken these stories out. What about my word count? But in the process of her giving me some really great advice about how to lengthen my stories through more show, I ended up having a collection longer than it originally was with those two stories in it. So I expanded so much with the other stories that I didn't need them. And actually, the book I'm working on now is one of those short stories. So I'm hoping
Oh,
to
nice.
expand it into like either a novella or maybe even a novel if I feel like there's enough there.
Isn't it scary to make that jump from doing short stories to, I want to say a full length feature, but that's not the right word, a novel or like a novella? Because I mean, with a short story, you got to wrap it up. Well, actually, it might be harder to do a short story because you got to wrap it on the ball in a short period of time. Which a novella or or a novel, you have pages to build that character development. So
Yeah, I actually started writing novels first back in the day when I was doing fantasy. I had like these epic series that I was working on, like a mermaid series that had like 5 books in it. So I was writing novels first. I honestly, like a lot of people, thought short stories were like starters. Like, oh, you start writing short stories and then you graduate to novels or novellas. So yeah, I assumed that being an author meant you wrote books and like books of a lot of word count.
yeah,
Um, but I burnt out on that, and and just stopped writing fantasy after I got into horror. And then I had these random ideas, and I was like, these aren't really like huge ideas. These feel like intimate moments, and that's really what a short story is. It's an intimate moment, usually in one place, but it can be in different places. If you're Stephen King, it could also be a lifetime. But
Yeah. True.
most of the time, a short story is meant to capture a moment. So it has a beginning, middle, and end, but that is usually limited to just like a scene. So if you think of it as like chapters in a book, a short story is sort of a chapter in somebody's like life, or a chapter in someone's um just an idea that's just a tight little spot. And it's hard, but it's also difficult to, after working on these little moments, these little worlds for so long, to then take one of those and be like, okay, what else is there? And to be like, okay, so this character who is just sort of like, the main character who just does this stuff, now I have to figure out, what else does he have to say? What else is there about his life? What else is there about the life of the people around him, about the situation he's in? And just pulling that taffy, as they call it, to
Hmm.
stretch out sort of everything that you think is important to understand the story in a bigger view.
And that sounds, yeah, that sounds like a lot.
It's fun, but if you're someone like me who isn't super empathetic to characters, it's hard to get into the heads of people that you literally don't know. Like these
Mhm.
characters, they don't exist until you figure out what it is about them that makes them tick. So I do have a really hard time with that, because for me, the idea is the strength, and the characters are just there to make my idea happen. So
Yeah.
I've been told a lot that, especially when I was first writing these out, that I needed to figure out more about the characters, because the idea is solid, but if the characters don't feel real in the situation, then the whole story falls apart. So that was, I think, the biggest growth for me as a writer, was figuring out the characters and how they are just as important as the idea itself.
The character development is so important. I mean, writing movies, it is so important because, like, when it comes to me, like when it comes to movies, and maybe I'm 42 now, so like
Mm.
I'm older, and I feel like the older I've gotten, I need to care about the characters. You have a
Oh
great
yeah.
story, but if I don't relate, I don't like the story, I don't like the characters, or like I don't care about the characters. How can I care about the horror movie if I don't care about the characters personally? So I agree. Character development is so important.
Yeah, it's been a trial,
Yeah.
trying to make these characters feel as alive as any other person would in that situation. And then now doing that on a larger scale, trying to do that with essentially a town that I have to create, and making every character who gets the spotlight shown on them feel like they've always been there, they've always existed, and they're just as real as the character who takes the spotlight, for most of the story. Um, yeah, I mean, it's stressful, and it's also a great a great time to have a lot of like friends and people that you've met, that you can be like, oh, you remember that one person? You're kind of like that, and you're going to be in this situation.
Hmm.
You just got to mine your friends and family, and also characters from movies that you've also liked, or a particular villain or a hero or anyone where you're like, yeah, I think my character fits like sort of that mold.
Love it. All right, so I'm gonna ask you one last question. Okay, I'm gonna put you in the spot. You ready?
Okay.
What is if someone asked you right now and said, "What is one interview on a horror room I should watch besides yours, which is going to be amazing? Which interview did you watch that you were like, wow, that was a good interview?"
Oh, so I am horrible with names, but there was this interview that you split into two with these two ladies, and I loved like the conversations that you guys had. What were their names? I'm so bad with names.
Is it Eliza and Rebecca?
I think so. That like the dynamic that you guys had, where like everything you were chatting about, it was from both the story, but then also like your guys' histories, and you got into
Yes.
to life and everything. Oh, I loved that interview. I thought that was so much fun. Um, and that's where I found out you're a mortician. Which, by the way, how on earth did you get into that field?
Long story short, actually, I'm gonna tell you off air because I'm gonna be doing a video in the future going
Okay,
into that. Yep. But
awesome.
no, but
Don't want to give away the
yeah,
secrets.
yeah.
Totally get
But
it.
Rebecca and Eliza, I agree. Amazing interview. So much that I give them both a show on my channel. So like,
That's right. I thought I
yes.
recognized
Mhm.
them. The
So
experience, wasn't it?
yeah,
The
yeah. So Eliza does the paranormal experience, and uh, uh, Rebecca does. See, I'm gonna fuck this up. It's called. Hold on. It's called Girl Meets Goth. Girl Meets Goth.
Yes, I saw
Yes,
that first episode. That was really cute.
yes, yes. So they are absolutely amazing. I hit it. I hit it off. Like people ask me, like, who are my best interviews I've had? I probably did like 700 now, in less than 2 years. And if you ask me, like, who is like my top 5 women, Eliza and Rebecca were always there, and I interviewed them separately and I interviewed them together. So like it was like after that interview in particular you were talking about, I was like, oh my goodness, I gotta have them. Like they need a show. You know what I mean? They need a show because
Oh
they're
yeah,
amazing.
definitely. Check out that interview. It's so much fun.
Yes. All right, Hoku. Where can everyone find you?
I'm on Instagram at hoku.sorchi. Uh, that's pretty much the only place that I post book reviews. I'll be posting any announcements about my next book that comes out. A lot of random stuff, memes, all that sort of fun thing that I love to do there. Other than that, I don't really have like a website or anything yet. But yeah, I have my links to my book, which you can buy on Amazon. The audiobook is actually available through other places like Audible, Spotify, Google Play. I put it out to as many different audiobook venues I could find. But I'd highly recommend the audiobook. The narrator, amazing. I love what he did.
Now, are you doing any appearances anytime soon?
Um, this is my appearance.
Okay.
Actually.
I didn't know if you'll be any book conventions or anything like
I
that.
wish. Unfortunately, I'm a little limited at being overseas, but someday when I'm back in the States, I would love to do appearances. I think that'd be really, really fun.
Definitely have.
Someday, so crossing my fingers.
Definitely have to. Listen, everybody, get your asses over to Amazon and grab My Dreadful Dreams. 13 Tales of Horror. Okay, this has been a blast having you on. I'm glad we finally got this interview.
I know, me too. Thank you so much for having me.
All right, everyone. Well, thank you for coming to the Horror Room. I'm Travis Bruce, and that's Hoku Sorchi. We'll see you next time.
Bye.